They say time heals all wounds, but they never tell you that some scars bloom into gardens. I'm sitting here today, 73 years old, with dirt still embedded under my fingernails and the ghost of rain on my palms. My hands, they still smell like rain, even on the driest days, even when the California sun beats down mercilessly on this little patch of earth I've tended for 47 years. People think I'm crazy when I tell them that, but I know what I know. You want to know why an old woman talks to her flowers? Why I spend every sunrise and sunset with my hands deep in soil, whispering secrets to roses and confessions to chrysanthemums? Let me tell you a story that will break your heart, and maybe, just maybe, help you understand why some loves never die, they just transform. It was 1973. I was 26, fresh out of college with a biology degree and dreams bigger than my small-town reality. That's when I met him. Daniel. God. Even saying his name after all these years makes my chest tighten like a fist around my heart. Picture this. A young woman, braids in her hair, wearing her father's old work shirt, kneeling in the municipal park, trying to save a dying oak tree. The city council wanted to cut it down, said it was diseased, worthless, but I saw life in those withered branches. I saw hope in the way a single green leaf clung to a seemingly dead limb. That's when he appeared. Like morning mist, quiet and unexpected. Need help? He asked, and when I looked up, I saw eyes the color of fresh earth after rain. Daniel Morrison. He was a drifter, he said, traveling from town to town, but he knew plants like I knew my own heartbeat. We worked together that entire summer. Every day, he'd meet me at the oak tree. We'd bring buckets of water, special soil mixtures, organic treatments I'd researched in dusty library books. His hands were magic. Everything he touched seemed to come alive. The oak tree began to flourish. New leaves sprouted. The bark healed. It was like watching a resurrection. But it wasn't just the tree that was coming back to life. I was falling in love with this mysterious man who spoke to plants like old friends and looked at me like I was the most beautiful garden he'd ever seen. Eleanor, he'd say, running his fingers through my hair as we sat beneath the oak's growing canopy. One day, we're going to have our own botanical garden. Acres and acres of every flower, every tree, every living thing we can imagine. We'll call it Eden's Return. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. He had this way of describing our future that made it feel more real than the present moment. We'll have a greenhouse for the orchids, he'd whisper as we walked through town. A rose garden with varieties from every continent. A pond with water lilies and a small bridge where we can sit and watch the sunset. I'd close my eyes and see it all. See us, gray-haired and laughing, still getting our hands dirty, still discovering new ways to make things grow. The ring came in September. Not a diamond. Daniel said diamonds were cold, lifeless. Instead, he gave me a ring with a small piece of jade, green like new growth, like hope itself. This stone came from the earth, he said, slipping it onto my finger beneath our oak tree. Just like our love. We were supposed to be married in the spring, March 15th, the Ides of March. I remember laughing about that, saying it was bad luck. Daniel just kissed my forehead and said, Eleanor, nothing could be unlucky when it brings us together. But March never came for us. January 14th, 1974. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the world into a watercolor painting, all soft edges and blurred lines. Daniel had been acting strange that week, distant, sad in a way I'd never seen before. He kept staring at his hands, flexing his fingers like he was trying to remember how to use them. I have to tell you something, he said that morning, his voice barely above a whisper. We were in his small rented room above the hardware store, rain drumming against the windows like desperate fingers. I was braiding my hair, humming some half-remembered tune, when I saw his reflection in the mirror. He looked like a man about to confess a terrible sin. I'm sick, Eleanor. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned around, still holding my half-finished braid, and saw tears streaming down his face. How sick? I asked, though part of me already knew. I'd seen the signs, the way he'd been losing weight, the cough that wouldn't go away, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. 6 months, he said, maybe less. The doctors in Portland, they said there's nothing they can do. The world shattered. Everything we'd planned, everything we'd dreamed, everything we'd built together, gone. Just like that. In one moment, our future garden became a graveyard of possibilities. I should have been angry. I should have demanded to know why he'd kept this from me. But all I felt was this overwhelming need to hold him, to somehow transfer my life force into his dying body, to make him as healthy as the plants he'd helped me heal. We'll fight it, I said, pulling him against me, feeling how fragile he'd become beneath his clothes. We'll find a way. No, he whispered into my hair. No, love. Some things can't be fixed. Some things just end. But he was wrong about endings. The next morning, I woke up alone. Daniel was gone. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. Just an empty bed, and the faint scent of rain on the pillow where his head had been. I searched everywhere, asked everyone. The hardware store owner said he'd left before dawn, paid his rent, and walked away with nothing but a small suitcase. The train station clerk remembered a thin young man buying a ticket to anywhere but here. He vanished like morning mist, like he'd never existed at all. Except for our oak tree, and the ring on my finger, and the way my hands still smelled like rain, even weeks later. I waited. God, how I waited. Every day for months, I'd sit beneath that oak tree, convinced he'd come back. Convinced that love like ours doesn't just disappear. But spring came without him. Summer passed. Fall arrived with its cruel reminder that some things die, no matter how much care you give them. That's when I started the garden. I bought this little house with its quarter-acre backyard, and I began to plant. Every flower, every tree, every living thing was for him, for us, for the dream we'd shared. I planted roses in every color, red for passion, white for purity, pink for the blush on my cheeks when he'd kiss me. I planted oak saplings, descendants of our tree. I created a pond with water lilies and a small bridge, just like he'd described. Year after year, I planted through lonely winters and scorching summers. Through the decades when my friends married, had children, built normal lives. I had my garden. I had my memories. I had his ring, which I wore until the day the jade cracked in half, 17 years later. People thought I was crazy. The spinster woman who talked to her plants, who named her roses after dead lovers, who claimed her hands smelled like rain. But I knew what I knew. Every time I touched the soil, I felt him. Every time it rained, I heard his voice in the drops against the leaves. This morning, everything changed. I was deadheading the roses, the ones I'd planted in the exact spot where Daniel and I had planned to build our greenhouse, when I heard footsteps on the garden path. Visitors were rare. The neighborhood children sometimes came by to hear my plant stories. But this was different, heavier, more deliberate. I turned around and saw him, a man, maybe 50 years old, with graying hair and eyes the color of fresh earth after rain. Daniel's eyes, in another face, lined with years I'd never seen, but unmistakably his. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a familiar gentleness. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you knew my father." The pruning shears fell from my hands. My heart stopped. The world tilted on its axis. "Your father," I whispered, though I already knew. "Daniel Morrison. He died in 1974, up in Portland. Cancer. But before he died, he told me about a woman named Eleanor, a woman who made things grow, a woman whose hands always smelled like rain. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who had Daniel's eyes and Daniel's gentle way of moving through the world. He never told me he had a son," I managed to say. "He didn't know," the man said softly. "My mother. She was someone he'd known before he came here. She never told him she was pregnant. I didn't even know his name until she was dying, 5 years ago. She gave me this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was Daniel and me, sitting beneath our oak tree, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. On the back, in Daniel's careful handwriting, Eleanor and me, September 1973, the day I asked her to marry me. I took the photograph with shaking hands. How did you find me? I've been looking for 3 years. Following his trail, trying to understand who he was before he got sick. The people in town remembered you. They said you'd created something beautiful here, something that seemed to grow out of love and loss. That's when I really looked at him, not just at his eyes, but at his hands. Gardener's hands, stained with earth and memory. I'm a botanist, he said, as if reading my thoughts. I run a small nursery up in Oregon. I've always felt drawn to plants, to making things grow. I never knew why until I heard about you. What's your name? I asked, though part of me already knew. David. David Morrison. And I've been carrying something for you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a ring, not the jade one that had cracked and crumbled years ago, but a new one, a simple band with a small green stone. He made me promise, David said, his voice breaking slightly. Before he died, he made me promise that if I ever found the woman who made him believe in forever, I'd give her this. He said to tell you that some gardens take more than 1 generation to bloom. I stared at the ring, then at this man who was Daniel's son, Daniel's legacy, Daniel's gift to a future he'd never see. He wanted you to know, David continued, that he didn't leave because he stopped loving you. He left because he loved you too much to let you watch him die. He said dying was easy, but watching someone you love die, that was the cruelest thing he could imagine putting you through. The tears came then, 47 years of them, falling onto the soil that had been my only companion, my only comfort, my only way of staying connected to a love that had vanished like morning mist. But he never really left, did he? David asked, looking around the garden. He's here, in everything you've grown, in every flower you've planted, every tree you've tended. This is the botanical garden he dreamed of. This is Eden's return. I looked at my hands, still dirty from the morning's work, still smelling like rain, even though the sky was clear and blue. Would you like to see the rest of it? I asked. We walked through the garden together, this man who was Daniel's son, and somehow, impossibly, my son too. I showed him the rose garden, the pond with its bridge, the greenhouse I'd built 20 years ago. I told him about each plant, each tree, each flower. I told him about the man who dreamed of all this, but never lived to see it. I have a confession, David said as we sat on the bridge, watching the water lilies dance in the afternoon breeze. I didn't just come here to give you that ring. I came here to ask you something. I want to expand the nursery, turn it into something bigger. A real botanical garden, open to the public, a place where people can come to heal, to find hope, to remember that beautiful things can grow from the deepest pain. He paused, looking at me with those familiar eyes. I want to call it Eden's return, and I want you to help me design it. I looked down at the ring in my palm, then at this man who had Daniel's eyes and Daniel's dream and Daniel's impossible belief that love could transcend death. I'm 73 years old, I said. My father always said age was just a number, David replied. He said the only thing that mattered was how much life you had left to give to the things you loved. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for me. Like it had been waiting 47 years to find its way home. When do we start? I asked. That was 6 months ago. We've been working together ever since. This man who is Daniel's son and I, the woman who never stopped believing in forever. We've drawn up plans, secured funding, chosen the perfect location. Eden's return will open next spring. But let me tell you what happened just 3 days ago. Something that will shatter your heart, and then put it back together again, stronger than before. I was having one of my bad days. You know the kind when the arthritis makes your hands feel like broken glass. When the loneliness sits on your chest like a stone. When you wonder if you've spent 47 years talking to ghosts. I was sitting right here, staring at a wilted rose bush, when the tears started falling. I'm so tired, Daniel, I whispered to the empty air. I'm so tired of carrying this love alone. I'm so tired of pretending that missing you doesn't still tear me apart every single morning when I wake up and you're not there. That's when I felt it. A gentle touch on my shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see David, but there was no one there. Just the wind moving through the leaves, carrying the scent of rain, even though the sky was clear. And then I heard it. Faint, like a memory made of sound. Look at what you've grown, Eleanor. Look at what our love has become. I thought I was losing my mind. 47 years of grief finally catching up with me. But then David appeared at the garden gate, and in his hands was something that made my heart stop beating. A journal, leather-bound, water-stained, filled with pages and pages of Daniel's handwriting. Pages I'd never seen before. I found this in my mother's things, David said, his voice shaking. She kept it all these years. She said he gave it to her the day before he died, made her promise to give it to me when I was old enough to understand love. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was dated January 15, 1974. The day after he told me he was dying. The day after he disappeared from my life. My darling Eleanor, I read aloud, my voice breaking with every word. If you're reading this, then David found you. If you're reading this, then somehow, impossibly, our love survived even death. I had to stop reading. The words were blurring through my tears, but David gently took the journal and continued. I know you must hate me for leaving. I know you must think I'm a coward, but Eleanor, my love, I couldn't let you watch me waste away. I couldn't let your last memories of me be of pain and suffering and slow death. I wanted you to remember me as I was in September, under our oak tree, when I promised you forever. David's voice cracked as he read the next part. I'm writing this from Portland, from the hospital room where I'll spend my last days, but I'm not thinking about dying. I'm thinking about you, about your hands in the soil, about the way you made everything beautiful just by touching it. I'm thinking about our garden, the one we'll never build together, but the one I know you'll create without me. Daniel knew, I whispered. He knew I would plant a garden. David nodded, turning the page. Listen to this. I know my Eleanor. I know she'll take our dreams and plant them in the earth. I know she'll create something beautiful from this terrible loss. And someday, when I'm gone, that garden will be proof that love doesn't die, it just changes form. I was sobbing now, 47 years of wondering if I was foolish, if I was wasting my life, if I was talking to shadows and ghosts, and here was proof that he'd known. He'd known I would do exactly what I'd done. But there was more. Page after page of letters to me, written in his final weeks. Letters about the roses he hoped I'd plant, the pond he hoped I'd build, the greenhouse he hoped I'd fill with life. January 28, 1974. David read, I dreamed about you last night. Eleanor, you were old, maybe 70, sitting in the most beautiful garden I've ever seen. Your hands were dirty from planting, and you were smiling. You looked so peaceful, so complete. When I woke up, I realized something. I may not get to grow old with you, but you'll grow old with our love. Every flower you plant, every tree you tend, every moment you spend with your hands in the soil, that's us, growing old together. I couldn't breathe. The accuracy of his vision, the way he'd seen exactly what my life would become, was overwhelming. There's more, David said softly. He wrote about me too. About the son he'd never meet. About how he hoped I'd find you someday. February 2, 1974. He continued reading. I met a woman today who reminded me of Eleanor. She's pregnant, and she has this way of touching her belly like she's already talking to the baby inside. It made me think about children. About the family Eleanor and I will never have. But maybe ... maybe love finds a way. Maybe the children we don't have become the children we help. The lives we touch, the hearts we heal. The journal went on for dozens of pages. Daniel had written about everything, his hopes for me, his dreams for our future, his absolute certainty that love like ours doesn't end, it just transforms. The last entry was dated February 14, 1974, Valentine's Day, the day he died. My darling Eleanor, David read, his voice barely above a whisper. Today I'm going to close my eyes and dream about our garden one last time. I'm going to imagine you there, 70 years old and beautiful. Your hands still smelling like rain, still making miracles grow from ordinary soil. I'm going to imagine that someday, someone will find these words and bring them to you. Someone who will help you understand that every day you've spent missing me, I've been there with you. In every flower that bloomed, in every tree that grew, in every moment when you felt less alone because you were surrounded by growing things. I'm going to imagine that you'll read this and finally understand. You didn't lose me, Eleanor. You've been carrying me with you all along, in your hands, in your heart. In this garden you've created from grief and hope and love that refuse to die. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, maybe you'll realize that this isn't the end of our story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. One where our love gets to touch other lives, heal other hearts, create other miracles. My hands are too weak to write much more, but I need you to know, you are the most beautiful thing I've ever loved. You are the miracle I never deserved. And you are the garden where my love will bloom forever. Until we meet again in whatever comes after this, your Daniel. David closed the journal with shaking hands. We sat in silence for a long time, surrounded by the garden Daniel had dreamed of. The garden he'd somehow known I would create. There's something else, David said finally. At the back of the journal, he drew something for you. He opened to the last page, and there it was, a detailed sketch of a garden. Not just any garden, but this garden. The pond in the exact spot where I'd built it. The greenhouse positioned exactly where mine stood. The rose garden laid out in the precise pattern I'd chosen. But in the center of the drawing was something I'd never built, a small gazebo surrounded by white roses, with a bench where two figures sat holding hands. At the bottom, in Daniel's careful handwriting, for Eleanor and me, when we're both old and gray and still dreaming of forever. He saw it all, I whispered. 47 years ago, he saw exactly what I would do. Or maybe, David said gently, he planted the dream so deeply in your heart that you couldn't help but make it real. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a garden. This was a love letter written in soil and seeds, in decades of faithful tending, in the absolute refusal to let go of something beautiful just because it seemed impossible. But here's the thing that will take your breath away. Yesterday, David brought me a small cutting from a tree in Oregon. An oak tree, he said, that had been growing wild behind his nursery for as long as he could remember. When he tested the DNA, he discovered something impossible. It was a genetic match to our oak tree, the one Daniel and I had saved all those years ago. Somehow, impossibly, a piece of our tree had made its way to Oregon, had been waiting there, growing in secret, preparing for this moment. Some loves, David said, handing me the cutting, are stronger than death. Some gardens take more than one lifetime to bloom. But wait, there's more. Because yesterday, as I was reading through Daniel's journal for the 100th time, I found a loose page tucked behind the back cover. A page I'd missed before. It was a letter. Not to me, but to David. To the son Daniel had never known existed. To my son, it began. I will never hold you, never teach you to ride a bike, never walk you down the aisle at your wedding. But I hope that somehow, someday, you'll find the woman I loved. I hope you'll see what she's built from the ashes of our broken dreams. I hope you'll understand that she is your mother in every way that matters. She carried my love when I couldn't. She kept my dreams alive when I was gone. She planted gardens in soil, watered with tears, and tended them with hands that refused to forget how to nurture life. Take care of her, son. Help her finish what we started. And know that every flower that blooms in your joint garden will be proof that love doesn't end. It just finds new hands to hold it. I looked up at David, this man who had Daniel's eyes and Daniel's gentle way of moving through the world, and I realized something that made my heart feel like it might burst. I wasn't alone anymore. After 47 years of carrying this love by myself, I had someone to share it with. Someone who understood. Someone who had been searching for me just as desperately as I had been searching for any sign that Daniel's love was still alive in the world. I want to build the gazebo. I said suddenly. The one from his drawing. I want to build it exactly where he sketched it. David smiled through his tears. I was hoping you'd say that. So that's what we're doing. Tomorrow, we break ground on the gazebo. Next week, we plant the white roses around it. And in the spring, when Eden's return opens to the public, that gazebo will be the centerpiece. A place where people can come to sit and remember their own lost loves, their own impossible dreams, their own gardens of the heart. I'm planting Daniel's tree cutting tomorrow. Right here, in the center of this garden that has been my church, my sanctuary, my way of staying connected to a love that never really died. And when I do, I know my hands will smell like rain again. Not the rain of memory, but the rain of new beginnings, because that's what love does. It doesn't end, it transforms, it grows, it finds new ways to bloom, new hearts to touch, new hands to carry it forward. The ring on my finger catches the afternoon sunlight as I speak. In 2 weeks, David and I will break ground on Eden's return. We'll build the greenhouse Daniel dreamed of, plant the roses he described, create the healing space he envisioned, and every visitor who walks through those gates will become part of our story, part of our love, part of our impossible belief that beautiful things can grow from the deepest loss. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't just a story about a woman who lost her love and spent 47 years mourning him. This is a story about what happens when you refuse to let go of beauty, when you plant hope in the darkest soil, when you trust that love is stronger than death, stronger than time, stronger than the cruel trick of fate that separates two hearts that were meant to beat as one. My hands still smell like rain. Even now, even after all these years, even on the driest days. Because some scents, like some loves, sink so deep into your skin that they become part of who you are. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, if you're very patient, if you're willing to tend the garden of your heart through every season of grief and hope, sometimes those loves come back to you in ways you never expected. In the eyes of a stranger who becomes family. In the dreams that take a lifetime to fulfill. In the knowledge that nothing you love is ever truly lost. In hands that still smell like rain. In journals that carry love across decades. In sons who find their way home to mothers they've never met. In gardens that bloom exactly as they were dreamed. The elderly woman looks down at her gardening gloves, then back at the camera, a peaceful smile spreading across her weathered face. Tomorrow, I plant Daniel's tree, and next spring, David and I will open Eden's return. 47 years later, our garden will finally bloom for everyone to see. Some stories, you see, don't end. They just take a little longer to grow. And love. Love never dies. It just finds new ways to make miracles grow from ordinary soil. My hands still smell like rain. And now, finally, I understand why. It's because every drop of rain that has ever fallen on this garden carried Daniel's love with it. Every storm that has ever watered these flowers was him, pouring his heart down from heaven. Making sure I always had what I needed to keep growing, keep hoping, keep believing in forever. That's why my hands smell like rain, because I've been holding love itself all along.